this is Indiana basketball time. We got the Final Four, and I understand you have a little history in Indiana basketball. Let's go ahead and start with that and talk about your glory days.
Well, I went to Evansville Central High School a long, long time ago, centuries ago, and played basketball there. We had some very good teams, played in the state finals twice when I was a sophomore and a senior, and in the semifinals during my junior year. But I really grew up in Indiana, and basketball was the center of my life for a long, long time. And I got an immensely rewarding experience from playing Hoosier Hysteria.
So when did you decide to go into public service?
Oh, that came along much, much later. I went to Central Evansville, then I went to DePauw University. Graduated without knowing what I was going to do. Spent a year abroad studying, came back, went to law school. And I finished law school, still did not think I would run for public office. And I went into the practice of law in Chicago, then came back to Columbus, Indiana. And it's when I was in Chicago and when I was in Columbus that I began to get interested in politics and began to consider somewhere along the line running for office. My interest was in foreign affairs, national security matters, and so I was more attracted to Washington than Indianapolis. I came to the idea of public service probably in the early 1960s.
And the first year that you ran for office, what year was that?
That was 1964, first time I'd ever run for public office. You know, there's a lot of luck in politics. I happened to choose the year that was the strongest Democratic year in the last century. I've often said that any fool could get elected on the Democratic ticket in that year, and several did get elected. But we had an overwhelming Democratic majority in 1964. We captured the General Assembly, the House, and the Senate. We captured, I think, 8 of 10 or something like that. Congressional seats had both Senators By and Hartke. We won the governor's race, Roger Brannigan. So that was a very different time, but it was an exciting time to be a Democrat.
All right, so you go to Washington. Was it everything you thought it would be?
Well, Washington's a big city, and it's got a lot of centers of power, but it's a challenging place, and really stimulated me a great deal. And I think the thing that really attracted me to the Washington community was the sense that you're participating in the Congress in the direction and the success of a free and a great country. And that stimulated me a great deal. I was able to work in the areas that I liked to work in. I was very fortunate in that regard. Not every member of Congress can do that. And so early on, I began to spend a lot of time on intelligence and national security and foreign affairs. People in Indiana thought I was a little strange, I think, because you don't ordinarily think of Indiana people being involved in those matters, but it worked out well for me.
And there was a lot going on in international affairs at that time.
Well, the big thing was Lyndon Johnson. And the interesting thing was that Lyndon Johnson ran for president in 1964 on a ticket of a war on poverty. And he got elected. And he got elected overwhelmingly. Now, fast forward to the last few presidential elections, and poverty has not even been discussed. As a matter of fact, in one of our recent presidential campaigns, the word poverty came up one time. So the political focus has shifted away from poverty to the middle class. That may be good, may have some negative aspects too. But the amazing thing was Lyndon Johnson ran for president on a ticket of launching a war on poverty, and he won. And it just shows you how the mood of the country has changed since that time. Now, I'm a Democrat in part because I think the Democrats try to help ordinary people. And I think the Democrats, we don't do a perfect job of this, but we try to help the last and the least and the lost among us. In other words, we make a few mistakes along the way, but we're trying to help the right people, ordinary people in this country. That was easier to do back in Johnson's day than it is today. And it was an exciting time. Those were the days also when the Medicare, Medicaid, higher education aid, aid to elementary and secondary schools were being passed for the first time. And those bills, those became law, the so-called Great Society. A lot of criticism of those laws, some changes made obviously in the years since, but they've stayed on the books. And they basically have become built into the structure of the American society today. So the early votes that I cast in the Congress for Medicare, for Medicaid, which were very controversial at the time, aid to education, all of these things have become accepted now. And it's rather exciting for me to look back and, excuse me, and say to myself, I was part of that, part of the Civil Rights Revolution. The Voting Rights Act came a year before me, that was in 1964, but I participated in several of the follow-on pieces of legislation that brought about a profound change in this country.
Mm-hmm. So, what have you been doing lately?
Well, I left the Congress about 10 or 12 years ago, and since then I've been the director of Indiana University Center on Congress, and I try to educate people about the institution of the Congress, about representative democracy, and about citizenship. How do you be a good citizen? And I'm deeply concerned because I think the Congress is an institution that's not working very well today. Obviously, it doesn't stand very high in the public esteem. It's under a lot of stress, and that's not good. You don't have a representative democracy unless you have a Congress. And I want to see, I don't want to see a weak president. I want to see a strong president, but I don't want to see what we have today, which is a timid Congress, a Congress that is not asserting itself, a Congress that isn't doing the job, a Congress that is not living up to its constitutional responsibilities. That's not good for the country. I believe that you get the best public policy if you have a strong president and a strong Congress, a tension between the two, and out of that tension, I hope a creative tension, emerges better public policy.
Seems like compromise is not a word that's that works very well right now, and that's one thing that you were known to do.
Yeah. Well, how else do you proceed? You got look. When I was in high school, we had 130 million people in the country. I don't know exactly the figure now, but it's around 310 or 20 million. So in my working lifetime, the country is far more than doubled in population, but beyond that, it's become far more diverse. How do you move that country forward where you have such enormous difference of opinion and diversity? You cannot do it without the process of negotiation, debate, discussion, accommodation, compromise, mediation. There's no other way to do it. If you come to the Washington today, or any legislature, and say, by golly, I'm not going to give an inch, it's a deadlock. It's a stalemate, and that doesn't work.
So how do you look forward and be an optimist? You know, how do you think can this change? Can it go back to a way where you can legislate and get things done and do things for the masses?
Well, in part, you have to have confidence in the system, but in order to look forward, you've got to look back. It helps to look back. This is a great country. We've had 200 and more marvelous years, accomplishments that are just spectacular. strongest economy in the world, strongest military in the world, the height of technology, entrepreneurship, culture. I mean, it's a remarkable country. And we've hit a bump or two. We're in a rough patch, and we're not dealing very effectively now with our problems. But that doesn't mean we're stuck in a rut and we'll never get out of it. No, I have an underlying confidence in the American people and the American voter. We may not solve all of these problems quickly. I don't think we will. But I think the country will move forward and that we will prevail.
Let's talk a little bit about the Indiana 9. So what kind of district was it when you started running and serving, and what is it now?
Well, Indiana changes all of the time, of course, but the 9th District has a mix of urban and rural. It's got some counties like Johnson, Clark, Floyd counties that are really quite urban. But you also have a lot of small towns and rural Indiana. So it's a real challenge. You've got the urban-rural split, and that's good, I think, in terms of representation. It's good for people that work in the 9th District and in both of those communities, because that's part of Indiana. We have urban areas, we have rural areas. The 9th District reflects that, as several other districts do too, but not all of them in Indiana. I think it gives you a better sense of what this state's all about, because we're not all urban and we're not all rural. We're not as rural as we used to be. We're more urban. And our communities are much more integrated today than they were back 30, 40 years ago. So that the people in Orange County or Harrison County have all kinds of ties with the urban communities in the larger cities, and vice versa, of course, so that you get much more interconnectedness than we did decades ago.
What advice would you have for candidates who are attempting to follow in your footsteps and serve the people of Indiana?
Well, you have to like Hoosiers. You have to have an appreciation, a fondness for, an affection for Hoosiers. If you don't like Hoosiers, don't get into politics, and you're in the wrong business. Indiana voter is an interesting person, solid, stable, patriotic, tolerant, steady, lack of pretense, and to me at least a very appealing person. And I was privileged to represent that kind of person in the Congress. So you begin with an appreciation of the Hoosiers, but to be a successful politician, you have to let people know you're on their side. In other words, people today have real problems. They're worried about health care, they're worried about education, they're worried about their families, retirement, and all the rest of it. And they're really working hard and struggling to deal with their daily problems. They're trying to get ahead. They want the very best for their families. They want the very best for their communities. And what they're looking for is candidates who will help them, who will give them some support and guidance. One of the good things about the Hoosier voter is the fact that at the top of the list of every Hoosier voter and the qualities they're looking for in a candidate is integrity. And I think that's quite a compliment to the Hoosier voter. They want good people. They want honest people running for office.
Now, while I've got you mic'd up here, Martha and I have lost a good friend that served in Congress, David Cornwell, not too long ago. And I wonder if you might have some words about David and the time that he served in Congress.
Well, David came into the Congress as a very young man, and he made quite an impression on all of us. He was energetic, came from a very good family, well respected in Orange County, and fit right in. I thought he was going to have a long future there if he wanted to. As it turned out, he wasn't there all that long a time, at least in comparison to a fellow like myself. But I thought he made a real contribution in energizing that area of the state and in his contributions within the Congress. Congress is not an easy body to impact. Got a lot of people up there and a lot of talented people. David had begun to make an impact when he stepped aside.
So
I knew his father very well.
did you? Yeah.
Gene Cornwell.
Yeah.
Gene ran one of the plants there, didn't he, in Orange County, and I'd known him for a long time, and I was delighted that his son, David was his son.
Right.
I was delighted when his son took an active interest in electoral politics. Gene had been interested in politics all along and was very savvy about politics. I used to visit him regularly in his office when I'd come into Orange County. There's a continuity there that's nice to see, father-son.
So anything else about the 9th District and serving the people and how things have changed over the time since you first ran and how it is today?
Well, I think in terms of change, the big change is in the word intensity. You know how Americans are. We're very competitive and we keep ratcheting up things. Today, the voter knows more. There's a lot more money involved. There's a lot more special interests involved. The media is much more involved. The whole area of social media has had a huge impact on politics since I left the Congress. And so the result of all of that is a kind of ratcheting up of the intensity of politics. Some good aspects to that, maybe some negative as well, but you just notice it at every point. It takes more money to get elected. It takes more energy to get elected. It takes more involvement of the different groups. I think the political parties probably have diminished in importance. In other words, they're not quite the major actors in politics they were 40 years ago or 50 years ago. The parties are still active and they still play an important role, but you've had special interest groups come in that now supply most of the money in politics and a lot of the energy as well. And people tend to align themselves today, rather than saying I'm a Republican or a Democrat, they'll say I belong to this environmental group or to this business group or to whatever. And so our society has changed and politics changes with it.
So Will Rogers said that he wasn't a member of any organized political party. He was a Democrat. So how do you think the Democrats can get organized in southern Indiana and have more of an impact in state politics?
Well, I think you have to go back to your roots and understand that the Democratic Party has played an enormously important role in this country because we stood on the side of ordinary people. Because we wanted a better life for everybody. Look, if the middle class or the lower classes are going to be represented in the halls of power today, they're going to have to be represented by the Democrats. The Republican Party has taken a position clearly in support of the upper tier in our society. They want tax cuts for the wealthiest people. They are less interested in the problems of the middle class than the Democrats are. Certainly less interested in the problems of the poorer people in the state. We have to go to our roots. We have to go to the founding principles of our party. I will say in my speech before the Democrats the story of the man I met at the plant gate. I've used this story many times. I was standing at a plant gate in southern Indiana shaking hands at 5 o'clock in the morning. And workers were going in one at a time at that early hour. And a fellow came by me and he said, "You don't need to worry about me. I'm a Democrat. I'll vote for you." And I turned to him and I said to him, "Why are you a Democrat?" And as he took his lunch pail and hurried on by me, he turned around and he said, "Well, the Democrats may not be perfect, but at least they try to help the ordinary guy." That's it. That he said that as well as any pundit I've ever seen, and that's why I'm a Democrat.
Yeah. I remember Bob Hamill, a longtime sports writer here in Bloomington.
I know
said
Bob.
he was a Democrat because he believed in the party of we, not the party of me.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. We believe in a party of shared responsibility, of opportunity for everybody, a party that you get ahead on in life on the basis of merit, not on the basis of family or a plutocracy. And I think the basic fundamental instincts of the Democratic Party are right on the mark.
And looking to the future, you get your crystal ball out and say, what's this country and this state going to look like in 10 years?
Well, who knows? I mean, that's one of the exciting things about it. Look, and the question about the future is impossible for anybody to answer. And in a sense, it doesn't really matter how we answer the question. The important thing is what we do about the future. What we do today, each one of us, to try to make the future better for our children and our grandchildren. That's the important thing. And I can sit here and speculate all day about what it's going to be like 10 years from now. You can too. Neither one of us know what we're talking about. What is important is not what we predict for the future. What's important is what we do to make things better in the present.
All right. Anything else?
Yeah, is that all right?
That's fantastic.